Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and I've recently been painting up all of my Japanese bolt-action models. However, I also had a few Konflikt47 models as well that I hadn't painted, and the new edition of that game is on the horizon, so I want to finish everything that I have before I inevitably buy more, because that's just going to happen. So here is the Sisori Hokusensha Scorpion Walking Tank, a metal and resin kit from Warlord Games. Some people will start crying about metal and resin kits, but I actually think these are excellent models, and this one especially is really cool. The main body is resin and has loads of really nice detail on it, including rivets, which always look good, and plenty of panel lines for visual interest. As I expect from Warlord, the resin quality is pretty good, with just the usual bit of flashing to clean up around various parts of the model. The forelegs are then made of metal, which again, nice detail, with the usual flashing and cleanup that doesn't take too long. There are front and back legs in this kit, they're not interchangeable, and I just looked at some of the pictures on the website to work out where they should go. It would be nice to have a little bit of an instruction sheet, or at least a kind of exploded photograph, but you just have to go with the pictures on the website, which is not that hard to follow. For the back of the Sisori, there is the option of either a power plant for the smaller version that just has the machine guns on the front, or an extended tail with a little turret on top. The air release channels for the molds of these resin components are positioned right over the glue join for this connection. And this is both slightly annoying, but actually a really good idea. It is annoying because you have to cut all of this away bit by bit until you get the parts to fit. But it's actually really good because you don't need to be neat about it, and once you've cut it away, all of that kind of scratched up cut surfaces that you've made is going to be completely covered inside the model once it's glued together. There is a little sprue of gun barrels for the little turret, and one of those is the Konflikt47 compression cannon, and that's thematically cool, and so I will be using that. And finally, there are two ball-mounted machine guns for the nose, and that's great because you can kind of aim them and glue them at interesting angles, but unfortunately the turret for the main gun is not movable at all. I was tempted to cut the turret to make it turnable, but I decided against it. Cleaning up the resin and metal is really easy. The metal is very soft, and Warlord's resin is a really good formula for model making, so it carves really nicely, and just make sure that you're cutting with good control over the knife. I always wash both of these materials with soapy water to clean off any powder or mold release that might be on the parts, and then superglue to glue them together. As the legs, as well as the front machine guns, are ball jointed and posable, I started to think about positioning the legs in an uneven way to make the Sisori mech look like it was leaning to one side, or like climbing over something perhaps, with one of the front legs raised. And if it's leaning one way, I can point the machine gun slightly to the other way, and that seems like a cool pose and far more interesting than the square-on, almost parade ground pose that the website photos have. I would later make a base with some stuff on it to show how the Scorpion is climbing through some difficult ground, but I'll get back to that towards the end of the video. When it comes to painting, I will be using the exact same steps as with the battle frame officers that I painted a couple of weeks ago. And whilst it's easy to recreate that scheme, it was maybe not the best idea to go with exactly the same process, as the panels on this model are much larger, and so they do kind of deserve a little bit finer detail work, but I'll show you that as the process goes along. To start with the base coats, the largest colour here is a light blue, and yes, I am definitely referencing Ghost in the Shell here, 100%. It's a cool four-legged Japanese robot with a tail, it's getting blue. But what I didn't do here was any panel highlighting, and anyone who's kind of familiar with my videos, and particularly my military vehicles that I painted in the last couple of years, I often highlight the middle of each panel at this stage to give the impression of the shape when the model is completed, and I didn't do that here. This is just a flat blue. On the battle frame suits, they're so small that any of that kind of detail and emphasis on each individual panel would kind of be lost. But this model would really have benefited from that, and so I'm kind of sad that I didn't do it. I also base coated the leg armour and some of the other details of the body, as well as any metallics, with a light brown. And then I got stuck into my early panel line. I like doing the panel lining early as it's a lot more subtle than the usual kind of finishing touch panel lining, and as a bonus it is easier and quicker. And then, as you might expect from me, I commonly do this, I'm just going to banzai the entire model with a fairly dark wash. As most of you know, I make my own ink washes with a dark brown and a black, and I mix them in different proportions of both the colours and also the other elements of the wash for each model. And so this time I'm going to add a little bit less water than I usually would, and this makes the wash a lot kind of stickier, which is going to mean most of the model becomes darker and not just in the recesses. But I'm also using more black and less brown, and so the overall effect is going to be really dark over the whole model. I had noticed before applying the wash that my hands were rubbing away some of the paint from the resin parts of the model. Now, I hoped that the matte medium in my wash would help reduce this, kind of in the final steps, and it did help, but it wasn't complete, and so at the very end of the painting process I did come back and fix up the odd through couple of bits here and there. But before we skip ahead to the future, let's get on with some highlights. As the blue is the main part of the model, I wanted to get most of the brown preliminarily highlighted first, rather than starting with the blue, because that means I can then match the blue to the brown coloured parts of the model. It made sense when I did the infantry versions, and I'm just kind of ticking along with using the same process here. This highlighting was relatively uneven and quite simple, without any real directionality to it or any kind of other process than sort of following the edges of the parts, but I'm keeping it all broken, and so it's not a full patent outline of any given component. The next step has the biggest scars of this paint job being scaled up from a smaller model to a larger one. When I painted the blue on the battle frames, those panels were so small that just that little edge highlighting did most of the work, and any kind of messiness was just hidden by the size. But here, with bigger, more visible flat surfaces, the messy edge highlight that I'm ending up with becomes a lot less kind of neat looking, and it almost kind of spoils the overall look of the model. Now, for a wargaming model, this is absolutely fine. This is plenty above the tabletop minimum of having glued the model together, but this does irk me somewhat that these imperfections are so much more visible than on the infantry version. As I was painting the final bright and sandy tan highlight over the brown, I realised that it doesn't necessarily matter as much. And this added to the scruffiness of the blue, and once it was all complete, from that kind of gaming distance, the arm's length looks, it has a lot of that visual detail that I go for, and the scrappy, messy look kind of breaks what could have been a very neon cyberpunk look and keeps it grounded in a more, not necessarily realistic, but a more real-world-ish kind of style. Alongside the officers' models, it has the same strong bright to dark contrast, as well as the colour matches, because I use the same paints between all of these models. I did mention the base earlier, which is now complete because I did that off camera. And I've added a broken tree that really fits the pose that I glued the model together in, having the Sisori smashing through the tree as it roves forwards, having the machine guns pointing off in that direction as if it's trying to get around the tree to find a target. And there's also a toucan from a 3D printed set that's got scared and flying away, which is kind of a cool touch. Strangely, Ratman saw the same set and instantly wondered why anyone would want a toucan. Some people just have no vision, I guess. Well, let me know what you think of this slightly messy paint job that this model has. Does it suit it? Or should I go back to clean that up and make it much more kind of neat and pristine? I strangely quite like it as it is, or at least the limited painting time that I get as a grown-up means that it's easy for me to pretend anyway. But for now, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.